Okay, it's connecting now, so it should pop up any second, and then I'll do our share, and then we'll be good to go.
So then Facebook will show for me as well. Like this will go, okay.
Yeah, we're live, so all of Brazil can start tuning in.
All of Brazil. Get them on.
Oh, man. So how did Travis do officiating your wedding, Emery?
Oh, he did a great job. I think surprising no one, Travis did a great job.
Oh, you officiated.
Yes,
Yeah, it was a whole thing. It's interesting too. The word Mosby did come up during the ceremony, incidentally.
It did. Not from me.
No, that was like probably the first conversation I ever had with my now father-in-law. He actually wrote a musical about the Civil War, and so we were just talking about, figures of history that we really enjoyed learning about. And I was like, who doesn't get like a fair drift, and we both said Mosby like at the same time. It was real cute. So he referenced that.
Yeah, I'm thinking that's the third wedding I've officiated. I'm thinking of just getting like the full-time civil celebrant license and just making it a thing. So anyone watching tonight, you need a wedding officiant in the Commonwealth of Virginia, I'm your guy.
Yeah.
We'll marry people for beer.
I feel like any task we just put for beer at the end of it, and we'll basically do it.
Yeah, history for beer, weddings for beer.
Both at the same time, like if you want.
We'll give it a second. Andrea will text me when we're up on the museum page. Give people a second to start tuning in.
I know that smell-o-vision isn't a thing, but we're growing catnip right now. We have catnip growing in the backyard, and it's starting to bud and blossom. So I brought some inside for my cat, and she must have stashed it somewhere in this room because it smells pretty dank for cats in here.
That'll be fun.
Yeah. So if anybody else has a cat who needs like a dispensary, let me know.
All right, Andrea just asked for a second. Facebook changed something, so posting's a little bit different. So she said she just needs one more minute.
Yeah, I'm saying we're having people who are trying to watch it, trying to figure out how to watch it.
Oh, let me double check. I just shared it to our page, and it did prompt me to share to the event, so I did that as well.
Share it everywhere.
All the
No
shit.
excuses. And we've done a lot of these things online.
True.
I counted up as a shameless plug. The Loudoun Museum YouTube page has all the episodes up. So does the Mosby page, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's 22 or 23 episodes.
Cool.
That's a lot of content.
I hope we don't get canceled.
See if they bring us back for season 2.
Viewers, let us know if we jump the shark, and then we'll know.
So you guys usually go around the bars and do this in person.
Mm-hmm.
That's really cool. Is there any trivia or something for the guests? Like to answer questions?
We've taken questions, yeah.
That's cool.
It's kind of like
we usually have a theme that we'll go around, but then, a lot of the fun is getting people from the audience to chime in, and, we still get to do that, online too, and in kind of a different way, but we've missed being in front of people.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
So we are good to go on the Loudoun Museum page. Are we good for Mosby?
All right, well, welcome everybody to the latest History on Tap. Today we are going to conclude our series on the Civil War. It is Staying Alive for 1865, so we're all going to share stories from the final year of the Civil War and the immediate aftermath of the war. So a lot of really good, really interesting stories to share. So real quick, I'll go around the room here and introduce everyone. I'm Travis Shaw with the Mosby Heritage Area Association. And tonight I'm going to be sharing an epic story of Civil War revenge. And I'm going to be drinking Hardway Summer Lager from Old Ox Brewing, one of my favorites this time of year. As always, share with us what you're drinking tonight in the comments. And I'm going to kick it over to my coworker at Mosby, Anne-Marie Kirileson, no longer Paquette. Congratulations, Anne-Marie.
Yeah, thanks, Travis. Tonight I will be talking about a concept that we have all been talking about, I think, in our own lives, the new normal, and what that meant for one local family at the conclusion of the Civil War. And tonight I am drinking Suns Out, Hops Out by Solace here in Loudoun County.
Cool. What about you, Joe? What do you have for us tonight?
I am going to talk about unreconstructed Confederate Frank Myers from Waterford here in Loudoun County. And while I do so, I'm going to be drinking Unified American Golden Ale by Loudoun Brewing Company. It's the beer they made for the local Loudoun soccer team.
Very cool. Now, we are very pleased tonight to have as our special guest Karina Esposito from West Virginia University. Karina, I understand you have a really kind of exotic story for us. What will you be talking about?
So tonight I'm going to be talking about the migration of the Confederates from the United States, specifically in 1865, even though they were migrating before that, to Brazil, and the settlements that they set up there in Brazil, and the history of that migration, a little bit of the history, and then the descendants of these Confederates that are still there, and helped found a town of Americana in Brazil, São Paulo, Brazil. And I am drinking Pernicious IPA from Wicked Weed.
Very good. Well, very excited for all these stories tonight. Before we get started, though, we want to thank Selma Mansion Rebirth for sharing this event with their followers. And of course, Loudoun Museum, Mosby Heritage Area. We also will be broadcasting it tonight. And if you miss an episode, you can check both the Loudoun Museum YouTube page or the Mosby Heritage Area's YouTube page. So with that, why don't you get us started, Joe?
Yeah, and I was trying to think back about what to talk about for 1865 to finish off in this 4-part series. And, talk about a Union officer killed at Ball's Bluff, to an enslaved person who self-emancipates for 1862, political prisoners in 1863, and then the 3 ladies who were Unionists and started that newspaper for 64. So I thought maybe a good topic for 65 was to talk about a Confederate soldier from Loudoun this time, but one who really struggled with the conclusion of the war. And I think Frank Myers is a good person to show how it's a complicated issue for a lot of soldiers trying to cope with psychologically the end of the war. So I've got some diary entries from him, and I think his life story is a good example of, if I was a Freudian, I would go through the 5 stages of grief with Frank Myers here, because you see kind of all aspects of that in his writings about the end of the war and then afterwards in 1865. So just to give a recap about who Frank Myers is. He joins at a young age, but he grows up in Waterford. And as I mentioned in our last episode on 1864, Waterford is a Unionist town. It's a Quaker town, anti-slavery town, but Frank Myers is very much pro-slavery and in favor of secession in 1861. He goes against his father and some relatives in Waterford who vote against secession. But it seems like if you track Frank Myers' life, he gets into pro-slavery and pro-secession, probably because of some time he spent down in Texas, where he visited relatives in Texas and came back more pro-slavery. And that then helps make sense when the war begins and the Union Army comes into Loudoun. He describes it as, quote, the abolition crusade upon the South. And in the first year of the war, the tail end of it, someone named Elijah White, who had a property where Selma Mansion is now, Elijah White gets permission to raise a unit. And it's a partisan unit, but a Confederate unit. And they'll become known as eventually the 35th Battalion, sometimes referred to as White's Cavalry. And they form in late 1861, and then they officially become that battalion in the spring of 62. And Frank Myers becomes one of his first recruits. Elijah White opens up a recruiting office in Leesburg, and they spent a lot of time patrolling the Waterford area. And for Frank Myers, it doesn't take long, even though he was at the age of 22, where he becomes a captain in the battalion, and he's the second in command to Elijah White. So that's a lot of responsibility at a pretty young age, even for the Civil War. And for White's battalion, they spent a lot of time patrolling the border. That was really initially their purpose, but they do get positioned with the main army for the Confederacy. So they do take part in a lot of the big Eastern campaigns, despite the fact that they also still do take part in some local border patrol actions. But I want to fast forward now to early 1865, because in that transition in the winter of 1864-1865, White's battalion was spending time in the Shenandoah Valley, fighting, and really unsuccessfully so, against Philip Sheridan. And for the prospect of spending the winter in the Shenandoah, for a lot of soldiers in this battalion, they don't like the prospect of not spending it near their homes in Northern Virginia. So a lot of them just begin to leave, and they, begin to desert out of the battalion. And that leaves Elijah White really no choice but to disband it and really send troops back to their home counties. And he charges Frank Myers with the task of being in charge of 3 companies out of that battalion for that winter, companies A, B, and C. And you would think that winter, again, 1865, the war is not going well, of course, for the Confederacy. Supplies are at a low, optimism running low. You would think with that plus Union soldiers nearby that it'd be a very bleak winter. Surprisingly enough, though, when Frank Myers writes about the time spent that winter, it sounds like the best one yet in terms of just personal life for the Confederate soldiers who are mostly within their homes. He even wrote that saying, quote, "The people of Loudoun have more parties, balls, and joyous gatherings this winter than has ever been known since I can remember." So it sounds pretty good considering the state of the Confederacy in 65. It leads you to think they probably had some sort of truce with Union soldiers who were along the Potomac, basically to let them kind of each stay alone. That's really the only explanation to understand why maybe there was such a lack of fighting going on. Now, to fast forward to the spring, Frank Myers has to get his companies of the battalion ready to, again, rejoin the Confederate Army to get ready for spring campaigning. But one of the fascinating things that strikes me about Myers is, again, the nuance within his writing. For example, I'm talking about the 35th Battalion, a partisan unit. Travis is going to talk about kind of the opposite end of the kind of partisan units and a guerrilla fighter of Moberly. But then there's also someone like John Mosby. And so they're all kind of hovering in the same category, but also 3 different categories. And you see that resentment out of Frank Myers. He does not have kind things to say about Mosby and Mosby's Rangers. He even shows hostility in his writing towards Mosby. He thinks that it's kind of almost unpatriotic for the soldiers who would rather fight with Mosby than with men of like the 35th, that they were taking the easy way out, that they weren't really doing much good. And he really speaks out against Mosby. He even says that he hopes the Loudoun Rangers, again, that Union unit made up of Loudoun soldiers, would come, and he says, whip them out. And he offers to even help them to whip out Mosby and his followers.
And let's be clear here, the Loudoun Rangers didn't need help to do that.
They need all
They
the
were
help
not
they
the
can
best
get.
performing group in the Civil War.
Yeah, as Southerners say, bless their hearts, they tried.
They tried.
Ineffectiveness or not, Frank Myers wants to see him victorious against Mosby. Again, that could just be speaking out, but like it shows that this is not a unified front always necessarily between different kinds of units within the Confederacy. There's also different entanglements. Myers gets caught up trying to help some soldiers avoid conscriptors who are being helped out by Mosby. So there's really no love lost between Mosby and Frank Myers. But again, Myers has the task of getting the soldiers ready for spring campaigning. And you see a lot of agony in Myers's writing, getting ready to leave Loudoun and then join Lee's army in the trenches around Petersburg. He writes about his severe headaches several times, so he must have probably suffered from migraines during this time. He writes about the regret and concern about leaving home. He had started courting someone in the Waterford area, and he talks about nervousness with leaving her, and almost really wanting of avoidance of going. Of course, he does get ready to go. He does leave when he's supposed to in the spring, but certainly wasn't looking forward to what would certainly be a hard campaign around Petersburg. And I think one thing by 1865 that's also fascinating about his writing about this period, about getting ready to go towards this spring campaign is almost I don't even know the right word to describe it as, but basically a movement away from this unconventional style of warfare that he's been doing for 4 years, and Mosby's been doing for 4 years, of attacks on supply lines, patrolling, these small striking raids. He shows in his writing that like he's come to terms with the fact that's not going to win the war. They might be doing it, they might have success, but you're not going to win the war in these kind of unconventional styles of warfare. And he's right about that. And he talks about how it's really going to be large scale battles in conventional warfare if the Confederacy is going to win. So I think it's a really fascinating transition from joining these units primarily to patrol and for local guard to now seeing the picture of if the Confederacy is going to win, it's going to be large pitched battles for it to happen.
If I may, Joe, this reminds me of our founding falsehoods. And when Travis pointed out, like, the militia gets a lot of the American militia is going to, carry the day. And that's, that's not the case. And Frank Myers is here saying the same things. Like, it's nice that you're doing this, but it's not going to ultimately get us there. It's not going to get us to that finish line.
Yeah, it's a piece of the puzzle. It absolutely helps with the war effort, but it's not going to be decisive.
Yeah, and that's a great point. In the Revolution and in the Civil War, I mean, there's a lot of, and again, we highlight a lot of these kind of obscure stories, and to get a sense of what it's like to live in it, especially in a place like the Mosby Heritage area and Loudoun, these stories are really helpful. But in terms of really understanding the outcome of the war, you've got to look at the larger, more traditional military history. And he sees that, and so, same with a lot of military historians today. Yeah, but he writes about this anguish about leaving. He says he was nearly crazy about the prospect of leaving. As soon as he gets down into Louisa County, he writes, he trashes the rest of Virginia, saying, what was his quote? The miserable wooded country is enough to disgust anyone with Virginia after spending a winter in good dear old Loudoun. Oh, how I wish I was there. So again, despite not wanting to leave, he does leave, and he does eventually make it down to the trenches of Petersburg with the main army with Robert E. Lee. But he's only there about 80 men left in the battalion. So like a lot of the soldiers in the Confederacy, their numbers are depleted. And I thought I would share a few different brief parts of diary entries that he writes in the final days of the trenches of Petersburg and then the collapse of the Confederacy. He details it quite well in his diary. So on March 30th, he writes, "Well, here is an awful state of affairs. I am sorry that I am a soldier. Luckett came from Loudoun, says Mosby whipped the Yanks at Hamilton and got whipped all in the same fight." He also in that same entry talks a lot about having to swim creeks. A weird subplot is he must hate swimming because he's always in a creek, it seems, and he's always complaining about it. Let's fast forward 4 days from that entry. April 3rd, he writes, "I am worn out entirely. Hope I may never see our army on a retreat again. 2 weeks ago, I left the Springs in Loudoun. It seems like 2 years." April 9th now, just after the lines have broken and the day of Lee's surrender, he says, "Great God, take care of us now. Our army surrendered today. I am sure it was never in such trouble in my life. I am ashamed to go home, but I can say I did my duty as far as I am able." What strikes me within his diary entries is that you see both, an acceptance that the war is over, but then also a defiance and detachment from reality, thinking it's not over. Sometimes even within the same diary entry, you see these competing narratives of acceptance and denial about what the reality is of the war. 6 days after writing about that, about Lee's surrender, he makes it back into Loudoun. And what he writes is that he held out, quote, that hope our cause may rally yet. But then he says within the same diary entry, "I am a little in the notion of getting a parole and staying home," when he mentions that there's Union soldiers patrolling nearby. So again, within the same day, he's writing, he hopes the cause isn't dead, but there's Union soldiers nearby, and he's like, I might just get a parole and sit the rest of this out. So almost in fact, he doesn't physically and mentally have it in him anymore to keep fighting, but still doesn't accept that the war is over. And the issue of parole comes up in his mind, and agony over it, about whether he should go to Harper's Ferry and get paroled out of the army or not. He wants to get Elijah White's recommendation on it. he looks to what Mosby does, and often when Mosby does, then Myers thinks it's okay if he does. And Myers and some other Confederates in Loudoun, they meet, and then they agree to go out to Harper's Ferry and get paroled. And it's certainly not a happy day for Myers. He wrote it was, quote, "the darkest, gloomiest day I ever experienced, and I have seen many." So he gets paroled, and then it kind of starts another fight. And one of those is internally within his own mind. He doesn't like the fact that he did it, and he doesn't like himself for doing it. He also doesn't like that Elijah White said that anyone who got paroled was a traitor. A week later, Elijah White got paroled. So
I was gonna say, like, wait, didn't he?
I'll drink to that. How about that?
We'll drink to the paroles. And it's also funny then, Elijah White says, "You're a traitor if you get paroled." Then a week later, he got paroled. Well, Myers then blasts Elijah White for this, and he criticizes Elijah White. He says he was a stubborn fool and would call him basically a traitor in name really only, or should I say, except for name only, throughout the war. So again, he shows frustration and dissatisfaction with White, but then also seeks his advice on several occasions. And this really starts the process of accepting the fact that he's got to go back into civilian life, which is hard enough. But what's different about this situation from other wars is that you are the defeated going home surrounded by also people who are the victorious. Waterford is a Unionist stronghold. They are happy that the war is over and that the Union won. You're not just the loser in the war, but you're surrounded by the victors as well. And that's what really causes Myers several problems, and he's tormented by that. He even writes that he thought about joining the US Army at one point just to get out of civilian life. He quickly showed regret for those thoughts. A lot of times he thought about breaking parole and continuing the fight. He calls himself a slave, basically, as a civilian, viewing this in terms of slave and free, like a lot of people did before the war, and using it for an example, that they didn't want to be enslaved because they'd seen what that was like firsthand.
Obviously, ironic.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah,
Slavery is bad when it happens to me.
Yeah, and that's not a unique thought. I mean, before the Revolution, Southerners are always saying they've got to fight against the British or they're going to be enslaved by the British. Meanwhile, they're enslaving people
Of
at the same time.
It's a fear they understand.
Oh,
Absolutely.
he didn't want to get enslaved.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, he's in his mind figure out ways to cope with this situation. So he thinks about even joining in Mexico with Emperor Maximilian and fighting in Mexico. He looks to religion. He looks to alcohol. He's in very much ways coping with this. He even in his mind starts wishing for another civil war to settle the issue of what the post-war Virginia is going to look like. And he kind of hopes for a war between Southern conservatives and the Reconstruction radicals. It must be lost on his mind that just happened over the last 4 years, and that was all time. But he's got a lot of anger, and he is trying to fight acting on it. He even writes that he was listening to a sermon, and there was a Union soldier listening to the sermon, and he writes about how he wanted to go over there and kill him, and said it would have been very easy for him to go over and do just that. So there's a lot of anger within him. There's a lot of other stories I can give, but just to move it forward, toward the end of 1865, the question becomes taking oaths of allegiance. And that becomes another issue then that torments a lot of soldiers about whether they should take oaths to the United States. To take an oath means that you're going to take an oath to the Union, but then also it does give you the right to vote. And another thing, Elijah White, who kind of has a very different path after the war than Myers, starts telling other Confederate soldiers to do is to take oaths of allegiance. This is not Elijah White trying to reconcile the nation. This is Elijah White trying to strategically give ex-Confederates the right to vote so they can then limit the changes in post-war Virginia. And actually, a quick picture. This is Frank Myers. It should be showing up on screen.
That hair.
It's kind of got Travis' hair.
Yeah, Travis, you can do that.
I've got the Frank Myers wave. Yeah.
So that's Frank Myers, but then I don't have Frank Myers' oath of allegiance, but this is, it's not even showing up on my screen for some reason, but this is an oath of allegiance from Leesburg, and it's from Armistead Motts in 1865. So this is kind of what they're agonizing over. Frank Myers included, but taking it gives you the right to vote once again. And one example of this, why it's important to take it, was for the election of sheriff of Loudoun County in the spring of 1866. And it was Elijah Wright running for sheriff against Samuel Luckett. The Unionists supported Luckett, Confederates and secessionists wanted to vote for Elijah White. Elijah White wins pretty handily in Loudoun County and becomes sheriff. And that gave him the power to enforce or not enforce whatever laws he deemed enforceable. So of course they tried to mimic the post-war Virginia in the same vein as pre-war Virginia in terms of race relations and trying to restore basically in pre-war Virginia. Eventually, after hearing from Elijah White, Frank Myers does take the oath of allegiance. And he says, well, it's funny too, I'll mention, back from 1864, when I talked about the three ladies who wrote the Waterford News, the Dutton sisters were two of the three. It's their father, John Dutton, who was working for the federal government during the war, who Frank Myers has to go to administer the oath of allegiance to the Union. And that certainly doesn't make Frank Myers happy. And he immediately goes home and writes about it, his disgust with Myers, how he wanted to strangle Myers. And then he wrote, after taking the oath, he said, quote, that he ain't white anymore. Again, seeing this through race. And then he said, quote, am registered as a loyal to the United States, and no honest, honorable, sensible, decent white man can be that. So again, he's not taking this oath because he sees this as healing the nation. He sees this as a way to, again, restore Virginia in the pre-1861 vein. Frank Myers writes really a really detailed account of the 35th Battalion. And again, you see the excitement, anger, concern, all the emotions come out in that official account. But he never really quite gets over the war. I mean, this anger continues and comes back out when things register in his mind. But he tries multiple businesses. For a while, he wouldn't step foot in Waterford because of all the Unionists in there. Eventually, he tried to start a business. It fails. But he lives into 1906 in Loudoun County, trying various different forms of employment. But I think it's a great example to show that after the war, there's a whole other war, and a lot of it's internal for soldiers, and a whole different struggle, but this time for political power that manifests as various ways, especially here in Loudoun, where you do have Unionists and secessionists.
Well, I'm going to be continuing with that theme of kind of Unionists and secessionists. Over the last 4 programs on the Civil War, we've talked about this divide. The majority of people in Loudoun County did support secession, but there are sizable pockets of Unionist support, and we've seen how that kind of plays out in a very personal style of warfare. We're talking about people who are in the same families, from the same towns, people who know each other, and so the war gets very ugly, very nasty. So I'm going to be telling a revenge story, and we're going to begin the story in the part of northwestern Loudoun County that we refer to as Between the Hills. You've got the Blue Ridge Mountains on the west, and then a very narrow, long valley, and then immediately east Short Hill Mountain. And like a lot of these kind of little corners of the area, Between the Hills is kind of known as a very kind of insular community, very separate from the rest of the county. It's a very tightly knit community. And it's here in 1844 that a young man named John Moberly is born. Moberly is born very poor, destitute. We don't even know who his father is. He grows up very kind of rough childhood. We get the sense that he was something of a troublemaker even as a young man. There's some accounts of him stealing horses and things like that. He is going to be coming of age, though, right around the time that the Civil War begins. And in September of 1862, he actually joins the 35th Battalion of Cavalry. He joins Elijah White's unit. Now, he joins the unit, but he doesn't really seem to spend a whole lot of time with the 35th Battalion, because while the 35th is away fighting with Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, Moberly is going to show up repeatedly in and around the area Between the Hills, his old stomping grounds. Now, again, this is kind of a rugged wooded, mountainous area. The perfect kind of territory that leads itself to supporting a guerrilla band or a partisan band. Now, Joe was talking about the 35th and about Mosby's Rangers, who are a little more on like the official end of the guerrilla warfare that's occurring. What we're going to see with John Moberly is the other end, where guerrilla war kind of blurs with just outright robbery, plundering, murder, things like that. So the area between the hills itself actually voted against secession. 2/3 of the people between the hills vote against secession in 1861. So it's fairly unionist in its sympathies. And so Moberly is going to take out a lot of this, I guess you could say, anger, frustration on his former neighbors. He's going to, steal, plunder a lot of property from these unionists between the hills. He's going to kind of terrorize them physically. There are accounts of him actually kidnapping unionists and tying them to trees on top of mountains and leaving them to either starve to death or be killed by animals. According to some accounts, after the war, they were finding skeletons up in the woods from this. He's going to kind of make it his specialty to kill Union sentinels along the road to Harper's Ferry. It's that long, kind of lonely road into Harper's Ferry through the mountains. And so these isolated picket posts would be attacked. Moberly would either capture and then execute these sentinels or just, straight up kill them. So in 1862-63, he really starts to gain a reputation as being, this bloodthirsty, guerrilla fighter between the hills. Now, Loudoun County is, as we said, divided. This doesn't play super well in the northern part of the county where the Unionists dominate, but down, specifically down the road in Hillsborough, which is overwhelmingly secessionist, Moberly has a totally different reputation. He's kind of seen as a Robin Hood character. He's seen as this avenger that is, just like Mosby or White or any of these other guerrilla leaders, he's sticking it to these Union soldiers that are coming into Loudoun County. He's sticking it to these, Tories or traitors, these Virginia Unionists who are not supporting the Confederate war effort. And apparently he's especially popular with the young ladies of Hillsborough, and that'll come into play a little later on in the story.
Gross.
Yeah,
I've seen pictures of the guy. I don't think he's a particular, but anyway.
the
He
pictures
was
of
like beefy, wasn't he? Like
He's a very broad kind of, he's big, but also very, I don't know, husky.
Yeah.
like a
he was-
bear.
He was stealing
Built
everyone.
like a bear, yes.
But he has a reputation, so.
Yeah, I guess reputation is everything. Speaking of reputations, he is going to solidify his reputation on May 17th, 1864. So the Loudoun Rangers, which we've mentioned, this Union cavalry group from Loudoun, they're in Waterford, kind of home base for them. The men are seeing family members, seeing friends. They're eating, nice meals with people they haven't seen for a while. Very relaxed atmosphere. At this time, they send 4 men, a small picket under the command of Sergeant Charles Stewart, to the south end of town just to make sure no Confederates try to sneak up on them. Well, of course, Loudoun County being Loudoun County, that's exactly what happens. So while most of the regiment is relaxing in town, Charles Stewart and his little patrol on the south end, they hear gunshots. They kind of ride off to see what's going on, and they ride straight into an ambush set by some of Mosby's Rangers. Men pop up from the side of the road. They fire into this small Union picket, and 3 of the 4 men drop to the ground instantly. One gets away to alert the rest of the group. Now, it's not clear at this time whether Moberly was actually with Mosby's Rangers as part of this raid on Waterford, or if he just happened to be kind of like following along under his own initiative. But what happens next is not under dispute. Several eyewitnesses will report that as Moberly rides towards these 3 wounded Union soldiers on the ground, he is going to ride his horse back and forth over top of Sergeant Charles Stewart, who's laying on the ground. He's got a bullet through one leg. He's got a bullet through his chest. He's bleeding out on the road. Moberly is going to ride his horse back and forth across him, laughing as he empties his pistol into him point blank. Stewart's hit in the hand. His hand is shattered. His jaw is shattered by one of the bullets. He's laying there barely, clinging to life. And Moberly gets down, pulls his boots off, and then rides away, leaving him and the other 2 soldiers for dead. And this is witnessed by many of the people in Waterford, people who are friends and family of the Loudoun Rangers. It's a pretty traumatic experience. So Stewart and the other 2 wounded soldiers are taken to a local house. It's actually Rachel Steer, who's related to Sarah Steer of the Waterford News, because everyone in Waterford is kind of related at that time. Yes, small Quaker village. These things happen. Rachel Steer calls Dr. Thomas Bond, the town doctor, to come in and administer them. And he basically looks at these guys and he's like, these guys are done for. In fact, the 2 privates that were with Sergeant Stewart actually do die there in the Steer house. But somehow Charles Stewart, he's got a bullet in the leg, bullet in the hand, bullet in the chest, his jaw shattered.
Been run over.
Yeah, he's been run over, trampled by a horse. Somehow he survives. And despite in the words, to Charles Stewart. Yeah, one of the Quaker girls who saw him there in the Steer house said he was shot to pieces. And the doctor, Dr. Bond, actually says, and this is a doctor talking, he said his only ambition in life was to live long enough to make another hell for that man who shot Stewart after he surrendered.
Wow.
And apparently Charles Stewart agreed with Dr. Bond, because from this point on, Charles Stewart is out for revenge. Now, just to give a little bit of background on Stewart, we don't know a lot about him. He's 20 years old when this happened, so he's the same age as Moberly. These are very young guys we're talking about. We know he was born in Baltimore County, Maryland. He enlisted in Martinsburg in 1863. That's really all we know is from his enlistment papers. I have not been able to find much background on him. He was a farmer, young guy, but he is going to recover from this horrendous wounding, and he is going to set out on a mission of revenge. Meanwhile, Moberly, he kind of amps up his game, so to speak. July 1864, he's dropped from the rolls of the 35th Battalion as a deserter, because he's really, again, he's not fighting this kind of warfare that Lige White is practicing. He's off on his own kind of, this again, like I said, kind of blurs the line between a partisan or a guerrilla and just an outright criminal. He's going to gather a band of.
Well, and to that point too, just look at who's getting paid. The 35th is part of the Confederate Army. They're getting paid. I mean, Moberly's not. I mean, yeah, it's a legitimate, illegitimate kind of, situation.
Yeah, Moberly's getting paid by like what he takes from people. And it's amazing because really around this time you see he's going to start attracting a lot of deserters, including deserters from both armies to his band, a lot of kind of common criminals. They are going to start stealing not only from Unionists, but from secessionists as well. One of his kind of schemes that he starts running at this point, he gets accused of selling African Americans into slavery. He captures black Teamsters from the Union Army. And, he sends back the white Teamsters, but when they look around, like, where are the African American guys? They've been sold south. After a while, he actually plays the other side of this, and he will capture African Americans and have his associates take them north to enlist in the Union Army, collecting the bounties for their recruitment. So he is kind of making money on both sides of this conflict. And I think that really speaks to the fact that this guy, his allegiance isn't necessarily to the Confederate cause, it's to however he can kind of enrich himself. According to one of the guys in his group, they said he's killed more men personally than anyone else in Lee's army. He killed at least 31 United States soldiers with his bare hand, like with his own hands. So this guy is not someone to be trifled with. And obviously, he's become a huge thorn in the side of the Union Army, particularly the Harper's Ferry garrison. Since between the hills, I mean, it's right up against Harper's Ferry. You can't really leave town in the middle of the night without getting bushwhacked by these guys. So there's going to be several failed attempts to capture him. In March of '65, they send the Loudoun Rangers to go capture him. As we all know, the Loudoun Rangers aren't necessarily the best unit for the job. They fail, several other units fail, so it's not just them. But what's cool is when the Loudoun Rangers are picked for this, guess who volunteers to lead the group? Sergeant Charles Stewart.
Yeah.
He is out for blood. Yeah, there's this instance where Stewart sets up an ambush along the side of the road leading up between the hills. They hear Moberly's coming, so they lay in wait. They hear a commotion coming, and what they see is actually a wagon driven by one of these African-American Teamsters, just hauling ass as fast as it can towards Harper's Ferry while Moberly's chasing after him, swinging his saber and laughing at this guy. Whether he's going to sell him to slavery or sell him into the army, we don't know, but terrorizing this guy. That ambush fails, actually. Somehow, all the shots they fire miss Moberly and he escapes unharmed. So that leads to the formation of a new and pretty unorthodox plan to put an end to this career. A civilian gets involved, a man named Luther Potterfield from Lovettsville. Potterfield is a well-known Unionist. He served as a scout for the Union Army. He's very heavily involved in kind of the Unionist politics in Northern Loudoun. He approaches the Army and says, let's the civilians handle this. We know this guy. We can set up a trap if you provide us with, first of all, kind of clemency, we're not murdering this man. And second of all, a reward. They offer $1,000 reward on the head of John Moberly and $500 on any of his associates.
It's a lot of money.
It is, yeah, for 1865.
In 65, that's a lot of money.
I think that shows how effective he was, again, not at trying to win the war, but as just angering and harassing Union soldiers, and the fact that he's killed that many people because he's picking off sentinels. Like he's
straight up a murderer at this point. It's not like reclaiming a rogue soldier.
Yeah. Very, very controversial guy, and we'll get into the controversy in a bit. But April 3rd, they put the plan into motion. The idea is 3 Loudoun Rangers, led by Sergeant Stewart, are going to meet up with 3 civilians, including Potterfield. The civilians are issued revolvers. They meet at Potterfield's farm, and the idea is like, how do we lure Moberly into this farm? So this is where the record gets fuzzy. Some people say they offered, someone contacted Moberly, said, we've got some horses we want to sell you. Some people say it was, again, these African Americans that he would sell either into slavery or wherever. Some people, I guess the romantics say it was a woman who lured him in. Or that they were dissatisfied and they were potential recruits for his band, which, coming from Luther Potterfield seems very odd because this guy was not shy about where his politics lay. But regardless of what lured him in, morning of April 5th, Moberly comes to the Potterfield farm. He meets with Luther Potterfield and agrees to return that evening to conclude whatever business they have. And when he rides up that evening, as he approaches Potterfield's barn, he sees none other than Charles Stewart standing there with a carbine in his hand. And I love that Moberly has enough time to shout out, and I got to get this right, "Oh Lord, I am gone," before 2 bullets rip through his skull and he falls from the saddle. So there was, at least for a split second, recognition that was Charles Stewart, the same man that he had trampled and shot and left for dead the previous year. And here he is a few months later, finally serving out his revenge. Yeah, revenge is
amazing.
Best served
by carbine.
By carbine. So in the immediate aftermath, they take Moberly's body to Harper's Ferry, you know, kind of lay him out actually in front of the provost marshal's office there in town. A huge crowd gathers because these are people who've been kind of terrorized by him. There's a lot of Unionist refugees in town, a lot of Union soldiers in town. Sightseers and kind of curiosity collectors start cutting scraps of his clothes off and keep as souvenirs. So they say by the time everyone was done, he was basically naked because everyone had taken souvenirs from his horribly bloodied body. One of the soldiers in town, actually a clerk in the provost's office, said that the community was ridden of its greatest terror. So that's one side of the coin. You know, the other side, as I said, he was fairly popular, particularly with the secessionists in Hillsborough. And it will be the ladies of Hillsborough that actually go to Harper's Ferry and collect his body after he was killed. And they will bury him at the Salem Church there between the hills, not far from where he was born. And this is where I say, like, it's a pretty complex legacy because, you know, this guy did all these terrible things. And objectively, I think you could say terrible things. But to the people of Hillsborough, and particularly at the end of the war, you know, this is April of '65, as the Confederacy is in its death throes, his actions get kind of whitewashed and he gets kind of lifted up as a martyr who is assassinated. You know, his killers were cowardly. They lured him into this ambush under false pretenses and then killed him, you know, killed him not in battle, but almost in cold blood is how it's portrayed. And that's exactly how it's portrayed if you go to see Moberly's grave today. If you look at his tombstone, he lays underneath the tombstone that has this very flowery poem talking about how he was a hero who died for his country and how he, you know, was kind of this paradigm of Southern chivalry and manhood, when, you know, his actual record, I would argue, what we've read historically does not necessarily bear that out. I mean, there's plenty of secessionists in the neighborhood who weren't too fond of his actions as well. So it's really an interesting glimpse at how, even as early, you know, like the spring of '65, how this kind of mythology or this legacy gets built up. So it's a very interesting story. Now, unfortunately, again, we don't know much about what happens to Stuart after the war. We know that he survives the war. He's, you know, discharged from the army. I don't know about you, Joe. I haven't been able to find anything about this guy after the war. Unfortunately, Charles Stewart's a fairly common name, and
Yeah,
I cannot find anything else about this guy. We just know that he got his revenge. He got what he wanted. So I think it's a great story that really shows just how personal the war had become by 1865, and particularly kind of this like microcosm of the war in Loudoun in Northern Virginia. So if you're ever between the hills, like say maybe if in 2 weeks you're going to join us at Harper's Ferry Brewing, you can stop by the Salem Church and see old John Moberly.
Yeah, it does seem that when it became clear what the result of the war was going to be, based on the two stories, it just got very personal. Like, basically, it looked like they were trying to grab whatever they could get, like, you know, and for themselves to, you know, make themselves kind of get over whatever was happening. So those personal stories are super interesting to me. I really like those.
yeah, and that I think really explains this area where you do have Unionists, Confederates, but also in close proximity to one another. You're not going to get that unless, you know, some areas in the Confederacy, in almost any area in the, you know, United States, you know, loyal area. I mean, it's kind of I don't want to say necessarily unique, but different from most of what the experiences are. We do have a few questions coming in from Facebook. One that had come up when I was talking about Elijah White, about, and Anne-Marie and Travis, maybe you know, Horace Newburn's writing before he had passed was writing about Elijah White, and he wanted to know if White, Lynn Bristol wants to know if White was if Myers was mentioned in any of that research on Elijah White. I wasn't looking at any of his research. I was mostly looking at either between Reb and Yank, but I was also looking on Myers' own writings. and then two different unpublished manuscripts was what I was focusing on. So I have not looked at it as a source. I don't know if you two are familiar with it.
I thought he was at least mentioned because Myers was the official historian of the 35th.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so he's a pretty standard reference for anybody writing about the 35th or Lige or that involvement.
Yeah, I don't know how
Yeah,
you
I would say
get
he's
it.
the kind of the starting point for any research on the 35th.
Yeah, White's Comanches is kind of like the definitive, if you want to know about White and that battalion, you've got to look at Frank Myers' writings. In I think early 1870s or late 1860s, he wrote that.
I'm 100% sure Hugh Horace looked at that. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, I don't know, what he says about Myers in it, but he had to have referenced Myers' writings and his diary too. Got a couple other questions coming in. Somebody asked kind of like, what would $500 be today? That's a tough one. Andrea was doing some research behind the scenes, and she said about $7,500 to $8,500, and for what she can see, and just in terms of kind of internet search for calculations.
Yeah, I mean, what did the average soldier make in the Army? Isn't it like something like $13 a month or something like that? So
yeah, 13 a month.
$500 to $1,000.
It's not a lot of money then either. Like 13 a month is not a good salary.
Yeah.
Nils on Facebook asked, did Moberly ever receive censure from Mosby or other Confederate commanders for his brutality?
So what I do know is that Moberly did, at least on one occasion, claim to be with Mosby's Rangers, and Mosby never censored him because, according to Mosby, Moberly never served with them, was never on their rolls, and was not part of what they were doing. So, and again, as you pointed out, Joe, or no, Travis pointed this out, I'm sorry, that like, who knows if Moberly still like snuck around behind these guys or like rode up randomly and pretend to be doing whatever they were doing. So I don't know, depending on if you ask another ranger, did Moberly ride with you, you might get a different answer. But according to Mosby himself, Moberly was a criminal, not part of their more reputable, at least, a reputable Confederate outfit, kind of a thing. But good question.
Yeah, Mosby absolutely disavows, although, God, I'm blanking on the name. There's a guy who rode with Moberly who writes in Confederate Veteran magazine many years after the war. He writes this kind of piece lionizing Moberly as this incredible guerrilla leader. And he's the one that starts saying, oh, well, he was a scout for Mosby and stuff like that. And like Mosby does not want anything to do with that story. Now, as far as White goes, I don't know, actually.
Yeah,
and I think you also get some confusion too, because I think there are some Maryland papers, at least, who report some of Moberly's doings, but are using Mosby's name. And you understand that Mosby, Moberly, similar kind of names, and they're both guerrillas. And I think part of Mosby's clear separation is trying to say, I'm not that. I'm the good guy, and I'm at least trying to obey rules of war out here.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly has a big fan club amongst many civilians in the area, so secessionist civilians. But even by 65, some of those pro-Confederate civilians are even writing that this guy is going above and beyond, and like he's becoming less and less choosy about who he decides to steal from or who he's deciding to harass. So I think there's a clear trajectory there where he kind of starts out as a more conventional guerrilla and then kind of descends into what he becomes.
And worth noting, he doesn't have a lot of guys with him. I mean, there's only like 4 guys they can name who actually rode with Moberly.
They say, his band is usually like 15 to 20 guys, and it's going to decrease as the war goes on. And as I said, it as the war goes on, it also is attracting kind of a rougher sort. Like there's at least one Union deserter who's with him. There's several Confederate deserters from other regiments. These guys are kind of very hard men, I would say.
Yeah, and resentment from others who see themselves as abiding by rules of war, who don't appreciate guys on their side, like Moberly, who clearly aren't following any of those too. And it does cause a lot of tension within the same armies.
That's the same time. Moberly's still scouting for White as late as, February of 65 when they raid Lovettsville. So
yeah, he always seems to be around when like Mosby and White are doing things. But again, like it seems like he's just kind of tagging on. Like
though, like an ambulance chaser, but for chaos and discretion.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put it.
So we do have another question, an interesting one, looking for an analogy between this and Harry Potter. Maybe we'll save that to the end.
I'm
Clearly,
on board for this, but I agree. Let's revisit it.
so like,
Yeah.
you know, we've been talking about in Loudoun, and like for Myers, Mobley doesn't have to deal with post-war Virginia. Myers, Elijah White, Mosby, they all do. Some others, though, they can't deal with it, and they decide it's better to leave than to deal with United States without the Confederacy. So this is a kind of fascinating story. So Karina, can you now chime in about those who aren't willing to stick around for the post-war reality in the United States?
Yes, absolutely. So growing up in Brazil, we all know the city of Americana in São Paulo. But me personally, I didn't know what Americana, why the name, what was it about Americana, but you're familiar that there's a city in Brazil. So after I moved here and I started pursuing history and doing some research on the Civil War and everything, then that name popped up on my research and I was like, oh, I have all these new skills, research skills. I can find out what Americana is. Did some initial reading and research on it. And then I actually went down to Brazil, to the city of Americana, and did an internship there. And basically, just to kind of give a brief history of it, in the early 1860s, but increasingly in 1865, you have Confederates, like Joel said, that move, thousands of Confederates that will move to Europe and Latin America. And some of these Confederates actually moved down to Brazil. So they don't want to be a part of the Reconstruction here. They want to move down to Brazil and kind of try to create a settlement there. So they move to various regions in Brazil, north, south, they move everywhere. A lot of these Confederates do return to the US, especially as Reconstruction starts to, wind down a little bit. A few years have gone by and the situation has changed. They come back to the United States. So a lot of these settlements were not successful. They came back. But one particular settlement was successful, which is in the region of Americana and Santa Barbara do Oeste. In a little bit, I'll have Joe put up the map just to kind of give you guys an idea of where that is. So that one did become a successful Confederate settlement, and either the ones that returned to the U.S., if they didn't want to return to the U.S., there you go. If they didn't want to return to the U.S., they actually went to that settlement where you see a very vibrant Confederate community starting to, really boom in this region. Now, there is a lot of, when I was there in my internship, I did go through the local archives. I did a lot of research. They have a museum there of this migration. That was fascinating to see all of the material, culture and everything that they brought with them. So that was pretty cool. But in a lot of the research, what you find is that there is a lot of reasons why they went to Brazil. Why Brazil, right? Why did they choose Brazil? Why did they choose that specific region in São Paulo? And it's really a combination of pull and push factors. The Brazilian government encouraged the migration. They facilitated transportation. And you do have, what I found interesting is that you have people coming in from the Confederacy to Brazil before to kind of survey the land. And then they write down what they observed and let the Confederates know here in the US what they believe they could get from moving to Brazil. So one particular, and he published his writings, and I found his writings in Brazil. It was a doctor from the Confederacy, Dr. J. Gaston. He actually traveled to Brazil in the early 1860s, and his writings are very revealing to what he believed Brazil could provide to the Confederates and what he believed that the maybe would attract the Confederates to come in. So there's a lot of talk about how the land reminds of the rolling hills of Alabama. There's a lot of talk about the potential for cultivation of crops, of cotton and all of that, and how the Brazilian government wanted them to encourage them to come in, facilitate their transportation, give them even monetary assistance so that they could kind of come in and settle. And obviously there's talk of slavery, because slavery at this point is still legal in Brazil, right? So in 1865, slavery is still legal in Brazil. So one of the quotes here from Dr. Gaston in his diary, publishing, so to let the Confederates know what might attract them to come to Brazil, he writes, quote, and this is a focus on, he knows that slavery is eventually going to end in Brazil, but he does make note of the gradual emancipation character that he observed, that he thinks that that would be the route that Brazil was taking. So, quote, though slavery may be destined to cease in Brazil at some future day by gradual emancipation, yet elements of society which have resulted in the mastery of the white man will never erase entirely from the people. So from his writings, you kind of do get a lot of insight into the reasons why he believed, this doctor at least believed, that he could entice Confederates to come to Brazil. And like I said, there was talk about the land, the cultivation, the Brazilian government wanting them there and facilitating their travel there. And so you do see a very vibrant community starting to form in Americana and Santa Barbara. If you read a lot of the Brazilian works on it, there are some historians who argue that the textile industry in there, the religion, you see Protestants, kind of a Protestant community. You see a lot of contributions from these Confederates that moved to Brazil, kind of slowly assimilating. Now, interestingly, initially when they migrated there, they kind of just wanted to be their own community. Even though they were in Brazil, they wanted to make sure that it was very tight community, marry their own. And interesting, a lot of these Confederates that went to Brazil, they knew each other here and they fought in the war together. Now, in 1865, in this particular settlement that I'm talking about, one person to know is Colonel William H. Norris from Alabama. So he purchased a farm called the Machadinho Farm in this little region in São Paulo, where you can see this first community starting to settle there. And the farm, together with the train station that was right by it, you see little commerce and trade started to boom in there, and this vibrant community coming alive in there, and eventually becomes the city of, they start to call it, the Vila dos Americanos, or Village of Americans. Oh, I'm going to the Village of Americans, Village of Americans. So then eventually it became the city of Americana, Santa Barbara do Oeste, and that little region that I showed you guys. You do have earlier settlers that come in as well, that write back home and tell the Confederates what they're experiencing in Brazil. Again, commenting on the diversity of crops, the fertility of the land. And another interesting thing that I thought, it was also the appeal of self-sufficiency. So you see in one of the writings by Patty Stiegel, a Confederate that had moved to Brazil, she does make comment of, she believes that if the Confederates really value being self-sufficient, they didn't want to come over there and work for somebody else. So she did comment on the potential for agriculture and how they can have that style of life and be self-sufficient. So there was an emphasis on the self-sufficient. And like I mentioned earlier, the emperor of Brazil at the time, Dom Pedro II, from writings again from this surveying of the land and the conversation between Brazilians and the Confederates, did again get involved and promoted migration, and Brazilian public opinion as well was happy with the migration. You see here one of the local articles from the town where they went to. Brazilians write this on the newspaper, quote, "Brazilians, we are all Americans. The North Americans are asking their brothers from Brazil, show me your wealth. Tell them, show us your needs. Let's exchange our productions. We can both be rich." So you do see some public opinion also excited that the Confederates are coming to that region and possibly bringing new technology, possibly bringing, the cultivation and cotton and all of that stuff. So you do see that emphasis on that. Now, the second part of the story, which is really interesting, is also that a lot of the descendants of these Confederates are still in Brazil, are still in that region, and they do commemorate their heritage of coming from Southern US. And to them, the Reconstruction period and the end of the Civil War, if you think about it, it's a story of triumph, because their ancestors moved there and successfully settled there and influenced the region, and kind of eventually assimilated. And they credit a lot of the, again, like I said, the vibrant community in there and the development of businesses and schools, to this migration. So the religion, the schools, the textile industry, to them, it's like a narrative of triumph. That's how they see their heritage. And looking at the things that they try to hold on to as well, this descendants is very fascinating when I was there in 2012, because it helps you understand what elements of their heritage they want to hold on to in order to pass that on. So one interesting thing that I found in there was that they had a cookbook that they wrote of food from the southern US. So it's in Portuguese and everything, and all the recipes. So you do have, them cooking southern food, and they do have, they formed a fraternity, Fraternidade Descendência Americana, the American Fraternity of American Descendants. So they try to keep that heritage alive. They have Confederate parties. They've have parties in the past where they're celebrating, and I think Joe can show some of these pictures from. So they have the Confederate.
Wow.
You can
That is
see
so
over
weird.
there.
I know this picture is.
That's so weird.
You can see there the Brazilian flag, the American flag, the Confederate flag, the São Paulo flag, and this, if you go online and you just Google the Confederate Party, you can see all these different pictures of these parties. Then you can go to the next one, Joe.
Yeah, which picture do you want?
Actually, I think they're all gonna probably be. Oh, let's do the symbol. So you can see here a mix of Brazil, American, Confederate, and then another thing, and I think, is there another symbol one, Joe? I think it's a party. Oh, I think it's now it's the cemetery. So there's a Confederate cemetery there in this region for the descendants. So as soon as you walk in, you can show the obelisk with the name of the original.
Oops, just in 1 second.
Oh, sure, yeah, with the name of the original Confederates that migrated in there before you kind of get into the cemetery part. And again, the cemetery there, you can see
So this is I can pull up the cemetery one. I wasn't sure you wanted this one as well.
Yes, so you can
Wild.
see there an obelisk, and that those are, at the bottom there, you can see that would be the last names of the families that first got there, and so it's an obelisk in there, and basically, it's another way, just like the cooking book that I said, it's another way for them to kind of keep their so I was in there in 2012, and so to kind of keep their heritage alive, their southern ancestry.
It almost is like this is like them allowed to create a version of the war that they want it to be without any sort of people saying this is actually how it was. Like it was like you could almost create in a lab what you want people to think the war was about.
Yeah, like they kind of get to pretend that they won. Like it's weird. I've heard of this story before, but actually seeing it is so
Different.
strange. I mean, I can't think of any other word, but like so strange to think of this in Brazil.
Especially because they have to adopt Portuguese basically and like Brazilian into it in order to be able to promote this vision of the Confederacy.
Yeah,
I have a question.
It's not a politics in there. Like, here we see the Civil War and the commemoration and everything is very much embedded in the political discourse. There, it's not really, like I said, I grew up in Brazil. I've been to Americana. I have friends. I had no idea about the history of that region at all until I moved here and went for a degree in history and specifically the Civil War. So it's interesting to see, first what elements they wanted to keep of their heritage. What did they wanted to preserve for their kids, and and then and the fact that they can remember and commemorate and talk about the war without the political baggage, I guess, that we have here.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because I mean, obviously Brazil has a tremendous legacy of slavery. I mean, in many ways, much larger than the United States does. How do people deal with issues of kind of race and slavery and the legacy of that in Brazil? And does this play any role in that discussion at all?
No, I like I said, I think it's two separate things. There's the Civil War in the U.S. and the Confederates that went in there, and then the history of slavery in Brazil. And I think part of the reason why perhaps it's not involved is because the descendants have been able to control the narrative of the reasons for the migration, why they're there, what they believe their heritage is. Because like I said, it's just kind of like they haven't, it's not part of a national, political narrative. So I think it is viewed as two different things, and so it's
like a weird outlier.
It's like fascinating.
Yeah.
It's fascinating because of that,
And Karina, like, sorry to interrupt, but like not surprising, like we're getting a bunch of questions in on this because everyone's fascinated by this topic.
I can't see the questions. Am I able to see the questions?
I'm technologically inept, so I have Andrea send me the questions as they come.
Oh, okay, all right. I was like, oh, sorry. I didn't want to ignore anybody, but I was
like, Nils brought up a good question. I'm sure a lot of people have. Did the fact that slavery was still legal in Brazil, which it is until I think 1887 or something, you can correct that, factor into the motivation to emigrate? And it wasn't the only reason, but it was a big reason, right? They wanted to recreate the slave system, and the emperor also wanted that, right?
Yes. So when I was there, I did try to find on my own the primary sources, like of the purchase of, if any of them purchased slaves. I personally could not find it, but writing from Brazilian authors and theses and dissertations that I went through in Portuguese, it does say that some of the Confederates that moved there did purchase slaves, but not all of them, and they had the opportunity to do it. So it's another thing that also gets included in how they remember why they moved there, because not all of them are purchasing slaves. But I think that Confederate doctor writings, it's revealing in the sense that gradual emancipation that I talked about. So perhaps like just that makeup of society, the agricultural and the hierarchy, if he was going to keep intact, which they perhaps were not really trusting that was going to happen here in the US. So that would be my guess. But that's definitely a motivation to go there for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because before the war, there's a lot of talk in the South of like expanding this empire of slavery into Latin America,
Oh,
Right.
in places where slavery has been abolished, like Mexico and stuff, but also into Cuba and Brazil and stuff. So is it like, does this play into that at all?
Yes, I think there is some like expansion and the whole, manifest destiny aspect to it for sure, especially in the 19th century. Exactly for what you're talking about, this talk of expanding American culture and all of that into Latin America. And for sure, to Southerners, that would be also a mentality that would be very much present at that point. So I have found some of that stuff on my research, which is a lot. I have a lot of stuff to go through. There was a lot of stuff in the archives, and it was in Portuguese, so I had to translate it. But it's just kind of it's fascinating. But yeah,
It is.
any
Yeah.
sense of, like, Allison asked a good question too, kind of like, do we know how many enslaved people were taken to Brazil? And I guess this actually answers two questions that we've gotten on Facebook in terms of who are the people that are moving. I assume it's people that have, even though Brazil is offering to fund the transportation, is it mostly people who are well off financially who can bring enslaved people with them? And also, how many do we know potentially of how many enslaved people were brought to Brazil? What became of them?
I'm not sure how many, but I do remember reading that some of them were able to bring their slaves. I want to say 3 families, but I know I would have to check on that. But some of them were able to do that, and then some of them purchased when they got to Brazil, according to these sources that I read. But when I was there, I tried to go to where those sources would be, and they were no longer stored there, so I couldn't get it on my own.
That's really interesting because I know in many other cases, before slavery was abolished in the U.S., for example, if you were trying to move to the U.S., you own slaves, you can only bring a certain number with you. And I imagine it would be the same thing in Brazil, because in each of these countries that still supported a slave system, there was an inherent fear of having too many enslaved people there, because enslaved people might overwhelm, the free population, as what happened, in Haiti. And I think that's something that a lot of us might take for granted. But I'll just pick up all of my slaves and move them to a new place. But of course, these other countries don't want a massive influx of enslaved workers either. So that was a really good question on Allison's part, because I'd had the same thought.
Yeah, and in 1865, Brazil is still a long way from abolishing slavery. So.
Yeah, and they don't seem. I mean, they're recruiting them because they see this as economic potential for Brazil, right, Karina?
Yes, definitely. Right. So they definitely see as a potential economic boom, exchange of ideas, technology. In the place where I did the archives where I did my internship, they have a museum in there as well, and they do show some of the technological innovations that they believe that the Confederates brought to the land. But there's no talk of slavery. If you walk through the museum, or if you walk through it's kind of like an educational, they have kids program and everything for them to see. And they really focus on the technology, the textile, the exchange of ideas and culture. And, people were just fascinated that you have the Confederates coming to Brazil. So especially public opinion in the region.
Yeah, and we did have a good question from Joel, but we both know Joel. If we need to, we'll answer it off screen to save time. But one more question before we move to Anne-Marie, and maybe after the fact we can come back to some of these too. Brazil is, again, it's not a white nation, and if ex-Confederates are coming with ideas of white supremacy, is there intermarry between Brazilian and people of color in Brazil with these people who are coming from the United States Confederacy to there?
So initially, no. They really wanted to keep their group, their community close. They wanted to marry their own. They wanted people to come, with them from the US. They knew each other here in the US before they fought together in the war. And once they first moved there, you're talking about moving to Brazil, where there's a lot of Catholics, and that's not your religion. Hence, you can see one of the motivations for the cemetery. So you do see a little bit of clash there in terms of religion. And so initially, no. Eventually, you do see more assimilation with the Brazilian society, overall, marriages and things like that. But initially, once they first got there, they wanted everything to be between them. So, yeah.
I think we might need to stick around a little later tonight to answer more questions, because there's a ton of great questions. But if we don't get Anne-Marie up on deck, you might run out of time.
Because not everyone could leave. So for the people that stay within this, they have to accept the fact of post-war realities, and that is the end of slavery with the 13th Amendment. So Anne-Marie, what about those who would stay locally?
Right. So, as we've talked about, some of the folks who do stay, and even those who leave as well, they have to, they have to come to terms with what the end of the war means to themselves in their communities, whether they're making new communities, or whether they're getting revenge on people, whatever it is. There's a whole, Joe alluded to this grief process before, and I don't think that's unique to Frank Myers. I think there are a lot of people here in the South that are going through that process. I think there are probably folks in the northern state who also are coming to terms with, we just shed 500,000 lives, trying to figure out who we are, what we're going to be, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought that I would start by reading a diary excerpt of Catherine Brown, who lived at Sunnybank near Middleburg, Virginia. And I would like to read her diary entries for Christmas of 1865, and then kind of unpack it a little bit, so that we can understand what does it actually mean, because she paints a really rosy picture, right? It's very Currier and Ives. It's optimistic. She understands the gravity of everything that's happened. The family has gone through its kind of hardship, but she comes from a very unique position, and we'll get into that. So, starting on December 25th, 1865. Ground, trees, everything covered with snow and ice are shining brightly. Looks beautiful. Children and servants are having a gay time with their firecrackers, having a tent fit up on the large rock with a camp stove on it. Kenzie, that's one of the sons, Kenzie has hauled a great deal of trash and dry wood on his donkey cart to make a large bonfire tonight. We had a great many servants here yesterday. All of Peyton's family, Jane and her father, have just left. She is just starting out for herself. Edwin, Catherine's husband, has just paid all the servants off for the year's labor. We had 10 stockings full of good things hanging in our room this morning. Children were charmed with Santa Claus's presents. Mr. Landstreet, the Methodist preacher, spent the night with us. Luther and Dick Hopkins, Annie Brown, Edwin, the children, and myself dined together on oysters, ham, eggnog, and cake. Scarcely ever had a more pleasant dinner on Christmas, but there were no friends that we cared to invite except the Herndon family, and they were sick, so I sent them their dinner. That's Christmas. Very happy. Everyone's getting along. December 31st, New Year's Eve, 1865. The last time I will write the old year through. How many sorrows and pleasures have we passed, and now at its close, I feel that we have much to be thankful for. We are all in good health, and my dear children and the servants all promised me in my Sabbath school to try and live better during the next year. Except my dear Eddie Lee, he said he would not promise, for he did not believe he would do it. And then to conclude, we all went in the large sleigh to church, heard Mr. Conrad preach a soldier's funeral. So there are several different things going on here in terms of relations between the family internally, and the family and their friends, and of course the family and the servants as well. And so in the first entry, December 25th, we hear that Edwin Brown is paying the servants for their year's work. And so here we actually have the freedom of all the servants come into play. This is the first record that we have of her actually paying the servants, even though the Emancipation Proclamation was in 1863. And there are, this seems like, oh, she did it on her own because she's a good-hearted person, and and it's the right thing to do. But it's not as simple as that either, because of course the war has ended, and earlier in 1865, the Freedmen's Bureau was established, the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands. And there's actually an office in Middleburg, only a few miles away from Sunnybank, where they spend their winters oftentimes. And so if one of these property owners did not pay their help, those individuals could go to the Freedmen's Bureau, and sue or proceed litigation, or have someone come and back them up to their employers. It's obvious that the Browns had the wherewithal to be paying servants for some time. They're a wealthy family. They own a very fine brick home in Middleburg proper. They have a Sunnybank farm. Edwin Brown not only runs the farm, but he runs a very profitable merchant business in Middleburg as well. But it's not until they are legally required to,
obligated.
yeah, not until there's like there's outside muscle who's going to back them up, are they actually paying the servants. It's also interesting to notice that she brings up religion a few times. Of course, it being Christmas time, that's normal. But it's interesting to note that the Browns, both Catherine and her husband Edwin, were instrumental in building the new Methodist Church in Middleburg. And by new, I mean it was built in 1857.
Yeah.
The old Methodist Church was an 1829 building that still stands in Middleburg. It's the oldest church building there. And during the war, Catherine notes that it's used as a storeroom. They keep corn in it. It's used as a hospital at some point. But by 1862, there are allusions to it being an African church. And in 1866, officially, the white Methodist congregation at the new church gives ownership of the old Asbury Church to the Black community. And it becomes the first Black community church, here in Loudoun, that is specifically for their use, for their worship services. And so that's another thing to take into account when she says at the very, very end of the year, we all went in a large sleigh to church. Now, it's very possible that's just her and her immediate family, but it wouldn't be unusual for someone as faithful as Catherine Brown really is to bring or encourage the servants to go to church as well. But at this point, it's likely that they would not be attending church with her anymore, that they have their own worship space, in what will become a separate but equal kind of an environment. And that's all well and good, but it's important to remember that while Catherine Brown thinks that everything is happy and rosy and as it should be, for her, at the end of this year, it really becomes again, using a term that I used in the beginning, the new normal, right? But it's a new normal in which her pattern of life has changed very little. She still has help that lives with her, and does the same work they did before. They did have a number of servants leave them during the war. In fact, in a previous episode, I mentioned Anthony, who at one point during the Civil War, he leaves with a group of United States soldiers, and he takes a horse with him, and he kind of apologizes, or he kind of slinks away, is Catherine Brown's recollection of that incident. And then later, Anthony kind of slinks back in, and she doesn't say what happened to Anthony. We don't know what Anthony's story was while he was, kind of a contraband individual with the United States. If he was misused in some way, if he was abused, if he had tried to reach out for help and didn't get any, and ended up coming back to the only home he really knows, we don't know. But only a few weeks before Christmas of 1865, Anthony leaves again, this time for good. And so we still have people that freedom in the place that they lived may still not be good enough, and they are seeking opportunities, or they now have the ability to seek those opportunities elsewhere. So there are a couple of other cans of worms I could get into, but I know that we're low on time, and there were a lot of questions that folks wanted to ask tonight. So I can kind of leave it there with that sleigh ride in the snow and, you know, all of those. It's nice, but, you know, kind of caveats to a very wholesome family picture.
I have one really quick question for Karina. How do we say cheers in Portuguese?
So we'd say saúde if you're going to like say saúde.
Saúde.
There's a lot of Brazilians watching, so you just scored some points.
Great call, Travis. I feel like we haven't cheersed enough tonight.
I know.
Great call.
It's been a mix of stories. It's been an up and down kind of night.
And I'm just fascinated by the story Embry just told, because again, it's and obviously we're all historians, so we can say our job's important. But like the perception of the person writing it is so skewed in almost every situation. Like Catherine Brown, it reminds me of like back in undergrad, a book that shaped, you know, a lot of my understanding. Like this book by Drew Faust about James Henry Hammond, and I'm not going down a rabbit hole of antebellum politics. I assure Anne-Marie and Travis that I've done that too many times. But like in his mind, when he dies in 1864, like surrounded by enslaved people singing to him, like he wanted to create an image in his mind of what the world was. And like, that was not the world at all. And it was such a fake reality. And it's almost, I feel like Catherine Brown doing similar things, like all is well, like trying to avoid the reality of the situation and viewing the enslaved people now in a, you know, such a distorted way of reality in a similar way that those people in Brazil do in terms of like what they're trying to recreate. It's fascinating. They're all different stories, but it's so much that it deals with the story you want to try to tell.
Yes, and it's something that's really interesting in Catherine Brown's perspective, because I think that her experience with her household is one that a lot of folks would like to assume slavery was like throughout the South, you know, in terms of she doesn't write about punishing or disciplining her enslaved workers. I'm sure they did, but we don't have a record of how they did that or when they did it or how often. Catherine does write extensively, you know, just consistently, I should say, about she runs a little Sunday school for her family in her house, and the servants are part of that they learn scripture together in the kitchen, and they read aloud to each other. And when Anthony actually leaves for the very last time, Catherine Brown says to him, I was trying to find the direct quote, but it was like, "I trust you will live your life as a good Christian, because as part of this family, we will be reunited again, you know, in heaven, in the great beyond," which on one hand sounds really wholesome, but on the other hand, in all of Catherine's dealing with the servants, she treats them as children, you know, in a way that was appropriate at that time, that the white adults are responsible for guiding these people, you know, and making
really with her.
Yeah, and making the best decisions for them, you know. And I don't know if that came across as being as encouraging as she thought it would be, you know, to Anthony, of like, "We'll see you again," you know, there's no getting away from it.
Especially since he's leaving, like he probably doesn't want to see her again.
Yeah, so it's one of those things that it you're absolutely right, Joe. It is very complicated, that whatever Catherine wrote down, there's no doubt that she meant what she said and believed what she said, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that was the reality for the servants living with her or the other formerly enslaved people that were living in the area.
Man.
Yeah, sorry. I guess before we were talking before we went live, and I was like, "Oh yeah, mine's kind of an optimistic story. It'll be
yes,
it's not as optimistic as you know." But for 1865, it's pretty optimistic. The idea that the servants are getting paid, you know, the idea that Anthony did leave on his own. He didn't need a United States Army behind him in order to do that, you know, and so things are very tentative. There's a new school being built in Middleburg for not just the Black youth, but also previously enslaved adult individuals as well. And the next year there will be the Freedmen's Bureau formally established. They'll have their office there. So there are good small things
It's
happening.
more
and it's
optimistic
about to
than the
happen.
dog, the horse stomping thing.
Yes, exactly. Hopefully now civilians won't
I
be
keep
run
thinking
over
about
in the
how that.
street. Moberly is dead.
happened.
Things are looking up.
That's one plus. And again, all these stories again deal with, you've got a 4 years of war. You've got people who are victorious. You've got huge advancements with the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. And then you have those who are trying to cope with the fact that they don't like that. And how do you resist it? Do you leave the country and do you try to replicate a vision of reality in a different country? Do you try to take oaths of allegiance and change the vote to limit that progress? Or, do you write about it and just distort it in your own mind how the reality really is? Fascinating aspect with the fact that this is not a war that happens over there that gets, the phrase gets used in the world wars. This is a war that's internally and it's within the United States. And for victors and losers, you've got to then deal with it in the post-war reality from 1865. And I think we hit all the questions on Facebook. So I know we went a little bit over. Karina, I'm going to recruit you for a pour over history interview for the museum.
Yeah.
It's been a while since I've been able to do that, but I think I found my next pour over history interview. I know we both like coffee, so that'll be a natural interview for us.
Yes.
I know we're over time and it's okay if we get overruled on this, but I'm desperate to know what the Harry Potter
What was
question
that?
was.
Great call. Let me pull that back up.
So will you be drinking Brazilian coffee for pour over history?
Yes,
Ooh.
that I will do. And I know how to make a good cup of coffee. I worked at
Ooh.
Starbucks for 16 years.
Oh,
Yeah, so all sorts of fun facts come to the table. Karina worked at Starbucks in Morgantown. I would do a lot of work at the Starbucks in grad school. Karina would sneak me caffeine to keep me awake. So and
that's a good friend right there.
It is.
Yeah.
And what she is drinking out of is.
I also got you a pour over.
You did, yeah.
I got you,
Really
like an iced coffee thing.
Karina really advanced my understanding of coffee. We also, when times got stressful, would drink out of the cup that she has in her hand right now from Varsity Club in Morgantown.
It's a big one.
So wait, am I going to talk about coffee or the Confederates?
We're going to drink coffee and talk about Confederate immigration.
Oh, okay, got it.
All right, so what is it? I mean, it's going to be probably in the morning, but you can drink the beer if you need. All right, let me find this question. Nils has asked several good questions. So he said, if you were to make an analogy between Harry Potter and the Civil War, would you consider Moberly a male version of Bellatrix? I've never seen
Lestrange. Okay, yes.
Yeah.
Of their shared penchant for sadism. I've never seen Harry Potter, so I'm going to leave this to you all.
I think that's probably kind of an apt comparison. I don't know. What do you think, Anne-Marie?
I'm trying to think, because while Bellatrix was indeed a sadist, she was also very closely aligned to Voldemort, and so she had an authority attached to her to do what she was doing, whereas Moberly was definitely more chaotic, kind of going on his own thing, right?
I mean, but he's at least in some way, shape, or form affiliated with Lige White, at least for a long part of his career.
Okay.
And he's using the Civil War as, I don't want to say cover, maybe that's too strong, but like he's using the chaos of war to personally carry out his own private war, I guess.
I'm trying to think if there's another character that might be more accurate to being someone who is still like ruthless and sadistic, but is also just kind of like clearly has his own mission, his own thing going on. Might need to think about that one.
Yeah, this might take some time.
Because in my mind, Moberly is more cruel than this. He's like a bully. It's like a kind of a Dudley Dursley character, just always.
But with more murder involved.
But with more murder. So I don't know.
You're just saying that because of the way he looks. I wish we could pull up a picture of him right now because he looks like a bully.
I don't have I have a picture of him in a
Actually, hold on.
Everyone pull up Google on your own home. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a picture of Moberly. It's not the heartthrob you would think from the way.
No, and wasn't he accused of sexual assault too? Moberly was. I thought he was like whatever the Victorian version of that would be.
Do not know about that. I cannot speak to that. Where? I swear there's a picture of him.
There is. There's a picture of the page number. Yeah, if anyone has any sort of Game of Thrones comparisons, that's really all
There
I
he
can
is.
help you with. Yep.
Yeah. And like he's young too, so that's him at age like what, 19?
Yeah, about then.
Yeah, so like everyone we've talked about, I mean, how old was Mosby? I actually have no idea. How old is Mosby during the war?
28.
Yeah,
He's in his later 20s, early 30s by the end of the war.
Frank Myers is early 20s. I mean, these are all young people that are, not all, but a lot of young individuals that get mentioned, kind of surprisingly so, when we talk about some of these figures and how young they actually are during the war.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah, I mean, both Stewart and Moberly are 20.
Yeah.
You know, when they have their run-in. So
Yeah, which you never really think of because you kind of picture them older.
yeah.
It's all the facial hair. Makes you think they're older.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
was surprised
the
that
next
that
time
was
y'all see me,
funny.
it's gonna be gone probably. So
Oh man, that's very
maybe
sad.
I'll get a
When's the
haircut
next
too.
time- Travis, when's the next time?
When
we're
is
gonna
next
consider
time?
The
being
next
hosted?
time is going to be Thursday, July 23rd. We are returning for our first in-person History on Tap since January. So it's been a while. We we miss you guys. We're going to be at Harper's Ferry Brewing on July 23rd, starting at 6 p.m. It is an outdoor brewery, so there's plenty of room for you guys to, like, you know, bring a camp chair, bring a blanket, spread out, social distance. You know, please be responsible and follow all the rules at the brewery. But it'll be me, Joe, and Anne Marie telling weird stories from Harper's Ferry. So we hope you guys can join us in person. We'd love to see you guys. Any other plans other than that, Joe?
No, the museum is Loudoun Museum is open now, so we're open Friday through Sunday, 10 to 4. So stop in. We've got, of course, free admission. We've got the Civil War era exhibit on display. We've got the wine exhibit on display. It's our traveling component of the wine exhibit is also on display at Duquesne Winery in Percival here in Loudoun too. So stop out there. They're open, I think, Friday to Sunday as well.
Great. And we also have a historic trail ride that we're planning too. That's on the 18th, I believe, Travis?
We have two. We have one on the 18th and one on the, was it the 25th? Or no, I'm sorry, August 1st. So we have two historic trail rides coming up. If you're an equestrian in the area, you want to, again, socially distance outdoors, ride a horse. You can't really get within 6 feet of someone on a horse anyways, I hope. But kind of ride through history is how we're billing this. So if you want to learn more, visit mosbyheritagearea.org.
Awesome. And I will say, you know, for the three of us, Karina, we really appreciate you joining us tonight.
Thank you. This was fun.
Thank you, Karina.
Tons of fun.
Again, she an instructor at West Virginia University. And how again in Portuguese do you say cheers?
Saúde.
So,
I think it's perfect.
Saúde!
Saúde.
yeah. Thank you all for joining us tonight.
Thank you.